The true national debt's not actually 30 trillion or even 90 trillion. He says it's much closer. You ready for this, Caleb? He says it's closer to $239 trillion. What does that mean? That means we would have to have $239 trillion sitting in a bank account today, earning treasury rates to be able to deliver on everything that we've promised that we can't afford to pay.
David McKnight, welcome to the Better Wealth Show.
Well, thanks for having me.
I opened up when you first logged on as a little bit of gratitude. You have made a tremendous impact in my life. When I first got life licensed, I was given a couple books, yours being one of them. Read your book, and it was good. And then I watched the documentary that came out, and you made me a believer in why we do what we do. And I think that book documentary combination is incredible. And I'm just like, I've become a true believer of this concept of power of zero, understanding all the teachings that you have been sharing for a very long time. And so what I would love to do is give a little bit of your backstory, who you are, what mission you're on, and then we can talk about things like life insurance, taxes, inflation, interest rates, and really try to get clear on, like, if you are nearing retirement, if you are saving and or investing for retirement, what are some of the principles and what are some of the things that you need to know about now and in the future that can affect your money and your investments?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah. So when it comes to your backstory, you didn't come out of the womb being like, I'm going to share with people about how they can retire in a 0% tax bracket. So where did that come? What is a little bit of your story from a standpoint of like who you are today and why you share this message?
It's sort of interesting. I got into the industry in 1997, which was an interesting year to get into the industry because Bill Clinton stood before the nation during the State of the Union. He says, "Hey, I got some great news. The national deficit is simply zero." So we went from having no national deficit, which is different than the debt. There was some debt, but basically he was saying, "Hey, look, we balanced the budget." And what the subtext of what he was saying was, there shouldn't be any more debt in the future. We're on stable financial footing. But here we are in 2022, and that's less than 25 years later, we're at $30 trillion of debt. And so, I got into the industry just right as like the calm before the storm. And by 2010, David Walker, who's a personal hero of mine, appeared on 60 Minutes and say, "Hey, look, I got some bad news. Tax rates have to double to keep our country solvent." So we went from, "Hey, things are awesome," in the course of about 12 years to, we are on this cataclysmic, crash course with, a debt apocalypse. And so right around 2010, I got acquainted with David Walker, former Comptroller General of the federal government. A lot of what his message was, look, because of unfunded obligations for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the predicted path of the national debt, and what we'll have to earmark just for the interest on all of that national debt is simply unsustainable. And so we're on this course that doesn't really add up. And so around 2010, I started to really crisscross the country, raising the warning cry to people myself. I developed a presentation that involved 3 buckets: a taxable, tax-deferred, tax-free, which basically says, look, there's 3 basic types of accounts within which you can invest money for retirement. And the first 2 are pretty problematic in a rising tax rate environment. You got the taxable bucket, where every year you pay a tax. You've got tax-deferred bucket, where you don't pay the tax until the very end. But guess what? If tax rates down the road, like David Walker says, are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today, then it's not really smart to have the lion's share of your retirement savings locked up in the tax-deferred bucket. And so I developed a presentation that talked about how to systematically reposition those dollars from taxable and tax-deferred to tax-free, so that by the time tax rates do inevitably rise, you've done all the heavy lifting. You can then take those dollars out tax-free. And so I built that presentation. I was asked by MDRT to present it at their worldwide annual meeting on 2 separate occasions. In 2014, I decided to write a book, and the book was simply the book version of that whiteboard presentation that I've developed over the previous years. And I sort of threw it out on Amazon and self-published it, crossed my fingers, hoped for the best. And, people started buying the book. They started reading the book, and it really sort of exceeded all my wildest expectations. And that sort of put me on the map. And then in 19, of course, we did the book, the movie, and really one of my main motivations behind the movie, The Power of Zero, The Tax Train is Coming, was to really convince the skeptic about the future of tax rates. The person that says, Dave, I don't really believe you. I don't believe that tax rates in the future, even in the next 10 years, are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. So what I wanted to do was crisscross the country and interview all of the most important experts in the nation on the national debt as it relates to the future of tax rate and say, hey, look, forget what I think. What do you guys think about the national debt as it relates to the future of tax rates? And guess what? They're all reading the same music and they're all singing the same song. They're saying if we don't change course as a country, that tax rates, within the next 10 years will have to grow up dramatically. Some of them even use the D word as it relates to the future of tax rates. Tax rates will have to double or we go broke as a country. So, I've wrote a couple of different books as follow up to The Power of Zero. So that really is my story. And I've been in this industry for a long time, since 1997. Our goal is in the next 10 years to put 100,000 people on the road to the 0% tax bracket. So that's really our mission. That's what we talk about. And, I love what I do. So
I'm curious now, do you still have people that argue with you or say like, I don't see this happening? Because if you look at history, if you look at our national debt, isn't the unfunded liabilities 90 trillion and counting when you look at all the things that we're on the hook to pay, but we don't have the money for?
Yeah, it depends on who you talk to. There's a very famous economist by the name of Dr. Larry Kotlikoff out of Boston University. He also takes up about 10 minutes in our documentary. Very, very compelling stuff. He's the foremost expert in the world on what we call fiscal gap accounting. What he does is he projects out over the next 75 years what we've promised to pay for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt. He projects out over that same time period what we can actually afford to deliver under today's tax rates. And he says, look, if there's a difference between those two numbers, then your country has a fiscal gap. And that's its true national debt. So the true national debt's not actually 30 trillion or even 90 trillion. He says it's much closer. You ready for this, Caleb? He says it's closer to $239 trillion. What does that mean? That means we would have to have $239 trillion sitting in a bank account today, earning treasury rates to be able to deliver on everything that we've promised that we can't afford to pay. So the problem is much bigger and much more it's much more poignant than what most experts are letting on when they're just looking at the $30 trillion of national debt. So yeah, it's a big problem.
It's interesting to me because the people that I've talked to, majority of them, I haven't found someone that's like, will argue with me that taxes are going to be lower. Even if you look at inflation, like inflation is a tax on everybody because you're like making the same amount of money from a buying power standpoint, but it's putting you in the higher rates. That's not even saying about them raising taxes. And we have politicians that are like not even shy about it. They're like, this is what we want to do. And if they look at other countries, we're very much on the road there. Are people starting to come around, or do you still have people that are arguing against it? And what do they have any validation of, do they have any valid argument as it relates to why they believe that taxes?
Well, let me tell you a quick story to illustrate sort of what the wave is. So there's a financial guru out there, historically been almost the diametrical opposition to what I believe. And his name is the White Coat Investor. So he's actually, you've heard of him. He's an emergency room doc out of Salt Lake City who found that he had a penchant for financial planning. And so that's basically what he does full time now. And he read The Power of Zero, 5 years ago, and basically said, it is crazy that Dave McKnight is recommending that people systematically reposition dollars to tax-free. Roth conversions are of the devil. You should never do it, And I went back and forth with him. I said, look, if you look at the math, if you look at the fiscal trajectory of our country, tax rates have to go up by definition. They have to, or we go broke as a nation. Yeah. He says, we're just going to sort of inflate our way out of the problem. We'll go back to, 70s style inflation. Well, about a year ago on Twitter, this was right before Biden got elected. He says, look, if Joe Biden gets elected, based on what his tax plan is, he goes, I'm going to convert my entire IRA all in 1 year. And so I responded to his tweet by saying, look, I'm glad to see you're coming around. And so he blocked me. So the point is, even my most dire opponents are starting to come around into our camp and say, look, we recognize, we could see the handwriting on the wall. The math doesn't lie. Tax rates are going to have to rise dramatically. So rarely will people contest what I'm saying about the future of tax rates. Will we disagree on how to best insulate ourselves from the future of tax rates? Sure, but hardly anybody disagrees.
Yep. And mathematically, and let's take inflation out of it. So mathematically, if rates and thresholds stayed the same and we didn't have inflation, it wouldn't matter, right? Like from a standpoint of taking a Roth or deferring or postponing for the future. The moment that a threshold or a rate or inflation and increases the likelihood of tax, then you would be better paying tax on the seed, not on the harvest. And I think majority of people, even my, I'll say very liberal friends that believe that taxes need to be increased, I think majority of people see that has to be it has to be the game across the board, regardless if you believe that or not. Like if you look at it from a country, it's a very powerful argument. And I think
this is a completely politically neutral proposition here. I remember I was giving this workshop in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. At the end of my workshop, it was 2 days before midterm elections, and people came up to me. They said, Dave, who should we vote for? Who should we vote for? And I never felt so politically powerful. And I said, you know what? It doesn't matter who you vote for, because whoever gets elected is going to inherit a math problem, the solution to which involves either doubling taxes, reducing spending by half, or some combination of the two. So it doesn't matter what your political persuasion are, because the math of our fiscal problems overrides everything. It overrides political partisanship. It overrides your political point of view. It overrides talking points. It is completely, politic neutral. And that's the thing about our message. It should appeal to both sides of the aisle. It should appeal to politicians on both sides of the aisle.
Yep. So I want to transfer into the next talking point, which is I think where a lot of people come at you is not the message that taxes are going to go up and we should be in a 0% tax bracket, but how you get there. You're a fan of Roth conversions. You're also a fan of life insurance. And I think that is like a trigger word, especially for our friend, the white coat investor and others. It's like the fact that you use life insurance means you're a horrible human being and that you're a scam artist. So let's talk about that, because again, you didn't come out of the womb saying, oh, life insurance is this amazing tool and we should convert into Roths. Why do you have this certain belief, and how do you teach where life insurance should be used and how someone should look at that asset?
Yeah, I don't look at life insurance as a silver bullet. I look at it as a complement to all of the other tax-free streams of income that are out there. I look at a strategy that contemplates multiple streams of tax-free income, none of which show up on the IRS's radar, but all of which contribute to you being in the 0% tax bracket. I want to take advantage of every nook and cranny in the IRS tax code. I think that if all you ever talk about is life insurance, you sort of look like a life insurance agent, and nobody hands their life savings over to a life insurance agent. So I think it's important to give everything their fair shake. I think every stream of tax-free income has something unique about it and some sort of value proposition. I love Roth conversions, for example, because if you had $1 billion in your IRA, you could shift every last dollar of it to your Roth IRA, no problem. So it could be a real workhorse in getting you to the 0% tax bracket. But the life insurance really does have some unique propositions. Number one, as you know, it's tax-free. The money accumulates tax-free. You can take the money out tax-free by a combination of withdrawing the basis and then loans. The money grows safely and productively. Whether it's whole life or index universal life, whatever flavor you prefer. We're not trying to hit the ball out of the park here. We're looking for 4 to 6% net of fees over the life of the program, which means that it works as a great bond portfolio. There was a guy, I just did a YouTube video on this. A guy appeared on Twitter and he says, look, life insurance is not an investment. And then Tom Hegna responds and says, it's not an investment. It's think of it as a bond alternative, then it works. And then Tom proceeded to say, look, I'm not an advisor. I don't make money off this stuff, but I pay $225,000 per year into my life insurance. And it is the best. Is it my stock portfolio? No, it's my bond portfolio. So we're not looking to make it the whole shooting match. It's just the bond portion of your portfolio. And you can get, as Tom says, reach into your portfolio, take out your bonds, replace it with permanent life insurance. You'll increase your return, you'll lower your risk, you'll lower your standard deviation on your entire portfolio, and you'll have a better outcome over time. And so that's really one of the main ways. It's a way to grow your money safely and productively. But the other way, and this is what I really love about it, is it's a death benefit that also doubles as long-term care. A lot of our clients are between 50 and 67. And if you're between 50 and 67, I can guarantee that if you're married, you have 4 of something. And I always like to ask these people, what is it that people have 4 of? And eventually we get around to the fact that they have 4 parents. And what is the likelihood that someone who's, say, 60 years old has one of those 4 parents that's going through a long-term care event even as they speak? And so a lot of people are saying, gosh, how do I solve this long-term care dilemma? It can wipe out my entire life savings. How do I do it without the heartburn associated with the traditional ways of mitigating long-term care risk, which is buying a long-term care policy? And one of the great things about permanent life insurance, particularly with the companies that allow you to receive your death benefit in advance of your death for the purpose of paying for long-term care, is if you die peaceful in your sleep 30 years from now, never having needed long-term care, guess what? Someone's still getting the death benefit, probably your kids or your grandkids. So there isn't that sensation of having paid for something you hope you never have to use. So is it a silver bullet? No. Is it a panacea? No, but it can be a very, very effective complement to all of the other streams of tax-free income that you're doing, particularly if it's structured and funded properly.
Yeah, I was when I first got into the industry, I was a big Dave Ramsey fan, buy term and invest the difference. I want to talk to you about that in a second. One of the epiphanies that I had, and it was quite frankly a turnoff when I was getting into this space, was people were like, "Oh, life insurance is a sexy investment. It's better than your investments." And I'm like, well, if you're talking to an amazing entrepreneur, that's a pretty big turnoff, quite frankly. And then when I started hearing the message of the or the multi-use of a life insurance policy when set up and used properly, and you articulated it so well, like it can do multiple jobs. And it's beautiful. And you think about it, like our cell phones, everyone that I know has a smartphone, and it's not just a phone anymore. You can text, it's a flashlight. It woke me up this morning. It's a GPS. I can do emails. I can tweet and do all kinds of things. It gives me so much utility on that one device. Yeah, it's over $1,000, but it's so inexpensive when you think about all the jobs that it does. And maybe that's why everyone in America has a smartphone, essentially. And so it's just one of those things where if we take a step back and talk about life insurance from the utility and not the investment, and not compare it to an investment using rate of return, and look at the result, which I think is cash flow, which is maybe tax advantage cash flow, people would start looking at it differently instead of just saying like, this is a better than an investment. Anything that you want to say before we go on to buy term and invest the difference?
Yeah, I think it's just a question of how we position it. I tell people this all the time. The more you talk about Roth IRAs, the more your clients will be attracted to the idea of permanent life insurance. And the reason that is because permanent life insurance, if we hold it out as the, like I said, the silver bullet, the panacea, I think people that have been reading Kiplinger's their entire life, Barron's, MarketWatch, they're going to be skeptical because they've always been told that life insurance is a scam. Dave, right there on Dave Ramsey's website, he says it's a ripoff, right? The only reason people do it is because they haven't researched it enough. So it's for people that are easily duped and they're gullible. Well, guess what? I think that if we're up against significant headwinds. And so if we approach the marketing of this particular tool as it is the end all be all, and it should replace your stock market portfolio and it should replace everything else that you're doing, that people are going to be inherently skeptical. So we have to recognize what its limitations are, but we also have to, be good at positioning, what its strong points are. And I think that if we strike the right balance there, that people are going to recognize that it does have strong points, do things that some of these other streams of tax-free income can't do. It doesn't replace them, but it complements them. And so I think as long as we're approaching this with a comprehensive, balanced approach, that people that are really, financially savvy are going to recognize the good that it can bring to their financial situation.
So question for you, and your philosophy, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's like, hey, be in the 0% tax bracket, because I can't promise what the taxes are going to be if it's not in the 0%. So my question is, other than the Roth and permanent life insurance, what other buckets are there that someone should look into? I mean, if you're in Chicago, you probably don't want to go into the municipal bond of, so I don't know, but is there any other assets that should be on someone's radar to do research on?
Yeah. So typically our clients, we're recommending anywhere between 4 and 6 different streams of tax-free income. So I'll go through them real quick one by one. You got the Roth IRA. We love the Roth IRA. You got the Roth 401k. It's great because you get a match, you get free money. You've got the Roth conversion that can be the real workhorse in getting you to the 0% tax bracket. You got the LIRP, which is great because it's safe and productive. You get death benefit that doubles as long-term care. And if you can get your IRA down to the right amount through Roth conversions and other shifting mechanisms, then guess what? Your RMD can be offset by your standard deduction. And if you can get your provisional income low enough, then your Social Security can also be tax-free. And so we've got 6 different streams of tax-free income. So, when I approach somebody with 6 different streams of tax-free income versus saying, look, I've got one stream of tax-free income, and I know you've been told your whole life that it's of the devil and, it's a ripoff and it's a scam. When you're nestling that LIRP among multiple streams of tax-free income, you come across as being more balanced and more comprehensive, and people tend to hand their life savings over to someone who comes across as.
And it's also really smart to not have all your eggs in one basket. One thing I want to go into, and we can talk unfiltered. I know that you're a big fan of Index Universal Life. I think that's another way of saying LIRP. And we do a lot of whole life, which might seem old and archaic, but we deal with a lot of entrepreneurs that want high liquidity, don't necessarily want a ton of variables, and they borrow against it. But like, I've had people on both sides of the aisle, and I think it's really, really important to have the dialogue. Can you talk about when you would ever use whole life, or are you just being polite and saying I'll say whole life because I'm on a show with Caleb? But like, when is, like, what are some of the pros and cons in someone doing their research, whether they're a consumer or an advisor? What should they look into as it relates to this topic?
I know that people, I don't know if you're an advocate of infinite banking or not. I know that whole life and a particular type of whole life works really, really well with infinite banking. And when people need predictability and they need to know exactly what their cash value is going to be in a given year, then whole life can be very effective. It can be a great bond substitute, so on and so forth. I tend to like Index Universal Life. I think you get slightly higher returns. I also love the fact that, to me, one of the most important provisions in the entire LIRP contract is the loan provision. And the one thing that I know about Index Universal Life is that there's some companies that guarantee a 0% loan provision. So as a rule, all LIRPs are tax-free, but they're not all cost-free. And where do life insurance companies make money on this? By charging you a net rate of interest for the loan when you take the money out. So what I'm looking for is a contract that's both cost-free and tax-free. I wrote a book called Look Before You LIRP, where I show what are the implications of having a loan that's not 0%. And so that said, there are contexts in which whole life is a superior product. And so I'm not here to knock that down or in any way denigrate whole life. I just think it just depends on the context. And for the type of planning that I do, which is people between age 50 and 67 that are looking to build money up, take money out, do so in a tax-free, cost-free way, get a death benefit that doubles as long-term care, it tends to work really well for that context.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, because one of the things that we have to do is look at the result and then reverse engineer that. And it's important, especially when you're using a life insurance contract that's multidimensional, to look at all the dimensions, because a lot of times, again, we say life insurance is not for the rate of return, but that's the thing that we measure everything against. And there's different riders that enhance certain contracts and others. And so I appreciate you articulating that.
I was just going to say real quick that one of the things that people have to remember is that when you read The Power of Zero and you hand the Power of Zero out to a client, it's a really agnostic when it comes to which product you use. Some of the people that buy my Power of Zero, the most are people that sell exclusively whole life. And so as far as the Power of Zero goes, it's really is agnostic when it comes to which product you use.
And the message is really, really important. And I just want to echo the importance of not having all your eggs in one basket. I think there's a ton of wisdom in having multiple different streams that are tax diversified, because again, we in Wall Street like to focus on diversifying your risk, but we're not diversifying the tax risk, which I think is insane. But then also just not having all your eggs in one basket. I want to talk about buy term and invest the difference. You have a phenomenal video on your YouTube channel about this, and I think you articulate it well. When someone says, Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, some of our other favorite gurus out there, they're saying buy term and invest the difference. How do you address that? Is you ask a question? Do you point something out? Again, I think we can link your video in the description, because I think you did a really good job on YouTube. I wanted to give you another way to articulate it on the show.
When people sort of portray life insurance, permanent life insurance, as a ripoff, they particularly Dave Ramsey, they tend to give you the following example. They'll say, hey, if you were to put, say, $10,000 per year into a permanent life insurance policy growing at such and such a rate, after 20 years or 30 years, you'll have, say, $1 million, just to pick a random number. However, if you were to take that same amount of money and grow it in an index mutual fund or some sort of mutual fund that Dave Ramsey might recommend. Instead of what you could get in that life insurance policy, maybe you get 8% or 10% over time. Instead of having $1 million after that time frame, maybe you're going to have $1.5 million or $1.7 million or what have you. And so that's how they lay it out. And they say, so by choosing that permanent life insurance policy, you just made a $700,000 mistake or $1 million mistake. And that's really how they quantify it. And it's incredibly misleading because when they do that comparison, there's a couple of different expenses that they don't include on their side of the ledger. They don't, when you say buy term, invest the difference, presumably you are going to actually buy term and calculate and include the cost of the term insurance in the calculus. And then investing isn't free. And if you look at the average cost of investing, we're talking 1%. So when you actually figure, you calculate in the cost of the term insurance and how much you're able to actually invest, net the cost of the term insurance, and then you actually figure out what the expense ratios are over the life of the investment, horizon, then you're not really going to be that much better off. And the second misconception that they have is that life insurance is in competition with a stock market portfolio. It's not in competition with a stock market portfolio. So you say, look, I can get 10%. And you're only going to get 4%. Well, guess what? In a balanced portfolio, what if we were to take that life insurance, replace your bond portfolio? How much further ahead would we be? And so when you do an apples to apples comparison instead of all fruit salad, it tells a completely different story. So there's all sorts of different ways to manipulate the narrative. And people that have an agenda and they have a narrative that they have to uphold, they're very, very good at casting this in a very derogatory way. And my job is to simply say, hey, look, let's be fair. Let's not illustrate fruit salad. Let's do a true apples to apples comparison. And what my video attempted to do was just to simply show the right way to do the comparison.
Yeah, and I also like what you're saying. It's not an either or. There's a lot of and. It's not saying you're anti-market at all. It's like,
right.
Let's look at the most effective solution. And it's interesting. We say the word retirement, which is kind of a swear word around better wealth, but the idea of retirement, let's call it what you actually want, a future cash flow plan. And if we started calling things future cash flow plans, and then we started measuring, I can't spend a rate of return. I don't necessarily care what the rate of return is. What cash flow is this going to enhance, give me? Then we would start making different decisions, across the board. And I think if I could do anything or encourage anyone when it comes to planning, it's think with the end in mind. And so you're a big tax person. So you're saying let's not just look at the gross number, but let's look at the net number after tax. But can you talk to the distribution planning? Because a lot of people, when we throw out things out like 4%, and now people are saying it should be lower than 4%, that's a huge problem. Even if taxes lowered or stayed the same, which they're not, but if they did, even with that, the typical approach is not that effective as it relates to having cash flow in the future.
Yeah, so we're talking about sustainable rates of return then?
Yeah, it's sustainable rates of return on distribution.
Yeah, so this book right here is the sequel to that book right there. So Power Zero is what started it all. And this is both are through Penguin Random House. So this basically says, this book right here says, we know that tax rates in the future are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. How do we best insulate ourselves against that? And then this says, okay, how do we avoid the number one risk facing retirees these days, which is in survey after survey, they tell you, the fear of running out of money before they run out of life. How do you do that? Well, there's two ways to do that historically. One is to simply try to obey what they call the 4% rule, which was invented back in 1992 by, now I'm going to draw a blank on his name, which I quote repeatedly in my book, but he basically said, look, if you do Monte Carlo simulations, there's really a sustainable amount of money that you can take out of your portfolio year over year without running an unduly high risk of bankrupting yourself before life expectancy. And basically, he said people that take out even 5% per year have 50% failure rates. And so he basically said, look, let's take out 4% per year. You get about an 85% likelihood of not running out of money before you run out of life. But when you utilize annuities, that tells a completely different story. Annuities can help you take out a much higher percentage year over year for the same amount of money. And so when people are relying on the 4% rule, or what people are now saying today is the 3% rule, it is a very, very expensive way to go about guaranteeing, or at least, mitigating the risk of running out of money before you run out of life. It's much less expensive to do it by way of an annuity. And historically, when people do annuities, they stick it in that tax deferred bucket. And so while they're mitigating longevity risk, they're not solving the tax rate risk problem. And so what I talk about in this book right here is how to mitigate tax rate risk and longevity risk in the very same financial plan. And so there's ways to do it, and annuities figure very prominently in the calculus.
Okay, so I wanna talk about a few things. This has been amazing, by the way. I appreciate how articulate you are. I want to talk about, if you look at the next 5 years, you look at interest rates going up, which is problematic when you look at our debt, because doesn't that increase the debt service? So it's interesting how high the interest rates can go, because our country's kind of handcuffing themselves. So number one, how is that going to affect? We look at house prices. Not that you're giving any advice, but any thoughts on that? And then any other predictions that you want to say in the next year or two? These are some things that I see happening that are going to affect your bottom line and your wallet.
We sort of painted ourselves into the corner with the stimulus from COVID. You borrow $6 trillion all in 1 year, and all of a sudden you've got a lot more money that's swimming around in the economy, a lot more dollars chasing a lot fewer goods. So that's a combination of Ukraine, the stimulus spending, and the supply chain crisis is driving inflation up. So what does the Fed do to combat inflation? Well, one of the tools they have in their tool belt is to increase interest rates. Any economist will agree that when you increase interest rates, you increase the cost of servicing the national debt, which means that as national debt grows, as interest rates slowly return to historically normal levels, we're going to find ourselves in a position where the cost of servicing the national debt will consume the entire federal budget, which means there's going to be nothing left to pay for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, just the cost of running the federal government. They're going to need huge infusions of cash. They're going to be looking in all quarters to find more money just to be able to keep themselves afloat. And so we're marching into this future where, what are we going to do? Are we going to borrow more money at these high interest rates to be able to bridge the gap in our, fill the hole in our budget? Or are we going to have to find revenues in new ways? And are we going to have to raise taxes in order to find that revenue? And I think more and more experts are agreeing that we're going to have to raise taxes to be able to solve all these financial issues, which is a problem for people who have accumulated the lion's share of their retirement savings in highly taxable vehicles like 401ks and IRAs, because essentially they've gone into a business partnership with the IRS, where every year the IRS gets to vote on what percentage of your profits they get to keep. Not a very good business partnership, if you ask me. And so it really is problematic. And as interest rates go up, fewer people are going to be buying homes, which means the cost of homes are going to start to drop. So there's all sorts of unintended consequences associated with our current fiscal trajectory. Yeah,
and there's so many follow-up questions, but I think again, you articulated the unknowns well. I guess my question is, if you're 30 years old, because I know that you guys are mainly serving people that are nearing retirement or in retirement, is if you're 30 years old listening to this, what advice would you give somebody knowing that where interest rates are at, where the debt's at, where the looming taxes could be? Like, what advice would you give a 30-year-old that's listening to this and maybe a little bit depressed, because it's like, what's the point if it sounds like our government's going to self-sabotage itself?
As a general rule, the younger you are, the more inclined you should be to contribute to tax-free. The farther your investment horizon is in the future, the more likely that tax rates are going to be higher for you in retirement than they are right now. Remember, if you're 30 years old, you're at a low marginal tax bracket, you put money into your 401k, you're getting a deduction at a low marginal tax bracket, only to postpone the payment of that tax till some point much further down the road, and you're going to pay the tax at a much higher rate. I mean, the math just doesn't add up. And so the younger you are, the more it makes sense to invest tax-free. Now, if you're rapidly approaching retirement and you say, hey, look, I don't think tax rates are going to go up in the next 5 years, fine. I'm willing to argue to a draw on that one. But if your horizon is 30 years in the future, I don't think there's any question that your tax rate is going to be much higher than it is today. And every single projection, every single math calculation I've seen bears that out. So I think that If you're sitting there saying, should I get the tax deduction by putting money into my 401k, or should I pay the tax today and put money into my Roth 401k or my LIRP or what have you, so that years down the road, I've done all the heavy lifting and I can then take that money out tax-free? I think it's really a no-brainer at this point.
Is it fair to say look for permanent reductions in taxes? So tax planning is very, very important, but don't defer or postpone to an unknown date with an unknown threshold, with an unknown governmental person in power. Like it's very risky.
Yeah, I think you put that very well. I mean, you're exposing yourself to a whole bevy of unknowns by postponing the payment of that tax. Do the heavy lifting today. I give you permission to not enjoy it. Forgo the tax deduction, pay the tax today, so that years down the road, you don't have to stress over what your tax rate is going to be.
Shifting a little bit, I want to know all the things that you've learned. You've really been in this game for 25 years. I know that because I was born in 1996. Not to age you at all, but it's one of those things that it's incredible. You've committed, what is 25 years? It's like a fourth of a century into this space. What are some guiding principles that you've learned about life, about communication, about business, about marriage, about parenting? I'll let you kind of take this, but like you've really been in this game for a while. You've learned a lot. You've probably made a lot of mistakes, and you've been able to help people like have so much more in retirement and just so much more out of their money. And so it sounds like an incredible, fulfilling life. I guess I want to hear from a personal reasons, like what have you learned, and how can I avoid some mistakes wanting to make an impact and make a difference in the world as well?
Yeah, so let me start by just talking about the industry, people that are maybe new to the industry. You have to find a presentation, a marketing path, and you have to get really, really, really good at that path. Let me give you an example. Back in 2008, 2010, I started a presentation. It was my 3-bucket presentation, and it was only 5 minutes long. And over the years, I tweaked it and I honed it, I revised it, eventually expanded to an hour. But guess what? I've been doing some version of that presentation for 15 years. Yep. I've made a career off of that presentation. I've written a book that sold 350,000 copies based on that presentation. And so I see a lot of people that jump around from program to program, and they get sort of good at it, but then they see another shiny object and then they switch. One of the things, I'm not very flashy. I'm not very, I don't see myself as the most charismatic guy in the world, but what I am good at is finding a path and getting really, really good at that path. I mean, I'm probably as good as anybody out there in terms of finding that path, honing it, refining it, and just getting really, really good at it. So find some aspect of our industry that you're really good at and become the expert. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hours. You do the 10,000 hours, you become as good as anyone else in the world. I've probably spent 10,000 hours on that presentation, and now I can go anywhere in the world and write my ticket, and I can be parachuted into any city in the country and begin giving that presentation, and I'll be able to, and that's really my meal ticket. And so get really good at something. Yep. And have the patience and the stick-to-itiveness to get really good at it. And it doesn't happen overnight, but as you put in your 10,000 hours, you'll get really, really good. I have people come up to me at the end of my presentation. What do I need to do what you do, Dave? I say, you need to find a path and you need to stick to it, and you need to get really, really good and do it for 10,000 hours, and you'll be better at it than anyone else in the world. That would be my advice for people in the industry.
Thank you. Is there any other life advice on communication, business, or anything else that you want to state?
Just a little bit of advice in terms of presenting. I found that the way that I present, there's 2 things that set me apart is how I present. And you heard my full presentation, presentation you heard me on a couple weeks ago. Yep. I am very big on telling stories, and I'm very big on asking questions. And I find that when you tell stories, it keeps people's attention. When you ask questions, it helps them stay involved and keep tracking with you. It lets you know as a presenter whether they're tracking with you. If I ask a question to a room full of 100 people and nobody answers, maybe they're not tracking with me. Maybe I need to back up a little bit and explain what I'm talking about. So those 2 things right there will go a long way. Sometimes we feel like we need to get up there and do this soliloquy, and that people are going to be absolutely, homing in on everything we're saying, and they're going to love it. Ask questions, tell stories. Those are two attributes of a presentation that will take you a very, very long way.
And if you look at the greatest communicator of all time, Jesus Christ, he did both incredibly well. And regardless of what you believe, I mean, the Bible is the most, sold book out there, and he's made a difference in how people have thought, and a lot of people have dedicated their life to either that or something, a version of that. And it's a lot because of his ability to communicate via stories and ask really powerful questions.
Yeah, and I'll give you a quick example there. When I teach a Sunday school class at my church, I ask a lot of questions, and I have people that come up to me afterwards. They say, Dave, that is the best lesson I've ever heard, or one of the best lessons. And I actually talk 20% of the time, and they did 80% of the speaking. And people want to be heard, and they want to. When we ask questions, we give them the opportunity to be heard and to articulate how they feel about a particular subject. And so just remember that ask a lot of questions, and you're going to find out what people think about things, and it's going to really help you out in your process.
I think one of the greatest compliments you can make to someone is ask them a thoughtful question and listen. And that's one of the greatest things that you can do. And so it's thank you for articulating that. I know that was a question you might not get on on a podcast, especially on money. There's a lot more that we could talk about, David, but I want to just thank you again for the work that you're doing, the message that you're sharing, and the work that you're putting in. The way I end all these podcasts is what I call the legacy question. The legacy question goes like this: if this is your last day on earth and you're with the people that you love the most, you can't give them any of your books, you can't give them any of your presentations, you can't give them any podcasts that you've done. You just have that one last conversation. What would you make sure to highlight in that last conversation with your loved ones?
Oh, that's a really good question. So if if the world is ending tomorrow and I'm with the people that matter most to me in my life, and I'm having a conversation, well, I'm obviously telling them how much I love them. I'm telling them how much they mean to me. I'm trying to impart really the most important principles, true, enduring principles that will benefit them not just here, but in the hereafter as well. And so timeless principles. So that's really the best legacy I can leave to the people that I love, is really what I've learned. And I think that people who study history are not destined to repeat the mistakes that people in the past have made. And so that's what I try to do with the advisors that I work with is, look, these are the mistakes that I've learned over the years. Let me bend the learning curve in your favor so you don't make the same mistakes that I make.
A smart person learns from their own mistakes. A wise person learns from David's mistakes, right?
That's exactly right.
Hey, thank you so much for being on. Thank you for just sharing all very generously with us. We're going to have your website down below. I would encourage any of my listeners or people watching this, if you've not read The Power of Zero or any of other books, which is the last one what is it? Safety and what's your last book that you wrote?
The last book that I wrote was actually this one right here, Tax-Free Income for Life. I wrote one before that called The Volatility Shield, and I've got a new one coming out. It's actually a novel, but it's got as a subtext modern monetary theory. It's a thriller. It's called The Infinity Code. So that's being shopped out to about 10 different publishers right now. So I'm very excited about that. So if you want a financial principle that's couched in sort of a Dan Brown type novel, then that's amazing. And for people who want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, I put out 2 new YouTube videos per week that talk about this type of stuff. So I'd love to subscribe there. But yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been really great to chat with you.
Amazing. And we'll have all of that down below. David, thank you. Hey, I want to thank you for watching till the end. If you enjoy our content, please like, share, subscribe. It helps other people find our channel, and we really, really appreciate it. I also want to let you know that we have this thing called the Better Wealth Efficiency Quiz, and our goal is to give you a wealth efficiency score in less than 3 minutes, and really highlight and get you to start thinking about the potential inefficiencies that you have in your life. So if you haven't taken the quiz, go check out. It'll be the link below. Check that link out, take the quiz, and then let us know your score.